Using both the original Chinese text and Lionel Giles' classic 1910 English translation, we'll explore the art of war chapter by chapter, not just what Sun Tzu wrote, but what he meant. Welcome to The Way and the War. In the previous video, we talked about the enormous cost of war. Sun Tzu proposed two solutions to this problem. Speed is the essence of war, and foraging on the enemy. The structure of these two solutions in the original text is very interesting. Sun Tzu first proposes speed is the essence of war, in other words, achieving victory as quickly as possible. Sun Tzu says, Sun Tzu believes that there has never been a case in which prolonged warfare has brought benefits to a country. A long war is highly likely to bring devastating economic exhaustion, population loss, and social decline to a country. Therefore, Sun Tzu believes that the first principle of warfare is to achieve victory quickly. If a commander cannot do this, one possible reason is that the commander does not have enough cleverness. Sun Tzu then explains his second solution in detail: foraging on the enemy. Sun Tzu says, foraging on the enemy is a solution for when the battlefield has entered a stalemate and your own side has become trapped in a prolonged war. More specifically, it means finding ways to obtain supplies and resources from enemy territory that has already been captured. By doing this, you can reduce the pressure on your own supply lines, while at the same time extending the amount of time your army can continue fighting and increasing its freedom of action. In modern terms, it means using war to seize the enemy country's resources and assets in order to offset the enormous cost of the war. That is why Sun Tzu says that the core objective of foraging on the enemy is using the conquered foe to augment one's own strength. Sun Tzu then explains specifically how this objective can be achieved. We can see many countries adopting similar practices in modern wars. For example, before Germany invaded the Soviet Union during the Second World War, it developed the famous Baki Plan. The plan explicitly called for the agricultural output of the fertile Black Earth regions of Ukraine and southern Russia to be completely diverted to supply German forces at the front and the German population at home, while cutting off food supplies to the cities and populations of northern and central Soviet territories. During the Iraq War, the United States directly controlled all of Iraq's oil fields. Iraq's enormous oil reserves were reopened to contracts with major Western international oil companies, such as ExxonMobil, Shell, and BP, allowing Western capital to obtain enormous profits from Iraq's post-war reconstruction and energy extraction. But foraging on the enemy did not bring all of these countries final victory. Why? Because foraging on the enemy has several problems. First, if the amount of resources and benefits obtained from enemy territory is not enough to compensate for the resources consumed by the war, then your own side will still have to face the many domestic problems caused by the war. Even if the enemy's territory contains enough resources and assets to compensate for the overall cost of the war, if your side cannot obtain those resources and assets as quickly as the war consumes your own resources, then you will still have to face the same domestic problems. More importantly, once the enemy begins to fight back, making it more difficult for your side to obtain resources and assets from its territory, the effectiveness of foraging on the enemy will be greatly reduced. Finally, there is another problem with foraging on the enemy. We can see this from the American wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The resources and assets obtained from enemy territory through war were not used to offset the burden on taxpayers. Instead, large corporations and related interest groups benefited enormously from them. In this situation, the internal problems of your own side will not be reduced. Instead, they may become even worse. So foraging on the enemy cannot solve the fundamental problem of a prolonged war. It can only reduce the economic impact of a prolonged war on your own side, and even the extent of that reduction is not stable. To use a simple analogy, it is like turning an acute disease into a chronic disease. The disease has not been cured. Instead, it may break out again at any time and become even more serious. This is why, immediately after explaining everything about foraging on the enemy, Sun Tzu says, "In war, then, let your great object be victory, not lengthy campaigns." From this structure, we can see that Sun Tzu considers foraging on the enemy to be a backup measure, for when you are unable to achieve victory quickly. It should not be used as the primary method for designing a war plan. Nazi Germany made exactly this mistake when it invaded the Soviet Union. In contrast, the blitzkrieg used by Nazi Germany in the early stages of the war perfectly matched Sun Tzu's idea of achieve victory quickly. This was one of the important reasons why Nazi Germany's early military operations went so smoothly. So what exactly does achieve victory quickly mean? Simply put, it means pursuing victory within a limited amount of time and with a limited investment of resources. The objective is to quickly defeat the enemy's effective fighting forces, make the enemy unable to fight back, and ultimately force them to surrender. War is like a high-risk investment. If you do not control the scale of the resources being invested and the amount of time the war continues, the consumption of money and resources can become a bottomless pit. And once that happens, there may be no end in sight. The war will simply continue until one side eventually collapses. For the ordinary people of any country, this is a disaster. There is one important point we need to make clear. Sun Tzu advocates achieve victory quickly, but this does not mean that he advocates a theory of easy and rapid victory. Sun Tzu's idea of achieve victory quickly is built upon the calculations made before war in laying plans. First, you make a realistic comparison between the strength of your own side and that of the enemy. Then you develop a detailed war plan and make sufficient preparations. Only after all of this is done does achieving victory quickly become possible. Sun Tzu's idea of achieve victory quickly is a military objective and a method of warfare. It does not mean blindly believing that your side can easily achieve victory in a short period of time through some kind of miracle. That is a theory of easy and rapid victory. Confusing Sun Tzu's idea of achieve victory quickly with this kind of rapid victory theory can lead to very serious consequences. Trump's decision to launch the current war against Iran is a clear example of making this mistake. So how exactly can we achieve victory quickly? And what should we do if, after the war has already begun, we discover that a quick victory is no longer possible? Waging war does not give us the answer, because those questions belong to the chapters that come later. Finally, there is one more very important point about waging war. The entire chapter is written from the perspective of the attacking side in a war, from the perspective of the side that holds the advantage. For the defending side, neither achieve victory quickly nor foraging on the enemy may be possible. So what should the defending side do? The answer is simple. Prevent the attacker from doing either of them. Prevent the attacking side from achieving a quick victory. Prevent the attacking side from obtaining enough resources and supplies from your territory to sustain its war effort. Make the war last longer. Make the cost of the war for the attacking side rise higher and higher. And as those costs continue to increase, the possibility that the attacking side will eventually collapse under its own burden will also become greater and greater.